Your show from the Citizens Bank studio. Thank you for joining us as we continue to celebrate so many people across the great state of Mississippi who are working so hard in the trenches to make this such a great place to live, work, and play. Hey, I got a great note from a good friend of mine that I know through the outdoor show, SuperTalk Outdoors. It plays every Monday at noon. We celebrate Mississippi's outdoors, and Mississippi is the capital of the outdoors in America, I like to say. But sort of the world-renowned Ramsey Russell called me this morning to tell me about a visit that he's going to be doing in Leland, Mississippi, which is where there's a wonderful outdoors museum about outdoor heritage of Mississippi and whatever. And we're actually going to have both Ramsey and the guy who leads that museum in Leland soon. But the reason I bring it up, I love to get feedback from people. I love to get ideas about, every corner of the state where there might be someone who we wouldn't really know about. They're just kind of going about their day, doing amazing work. And I love to really shine the light on people like that. So if you've got ideas, you can go to the SuperTalk Mississippi Facebook page or the SuperTalk Mississippi Gulf Coast Facebook page and just send a message to us through those notes. I'll get it. And let us know your ideas about potential guests for my show. There is a great headline that was on SuperTalk Mississippi News. And incidentally, if you haven't signed up for the newsletter or downloaded the SuperTalk Mississippi app, I strongly recommend you do it. You can go to supertalk.fm. It's the same thing as saying supertalk.com, but it's supertalk.fm. And that will bring you to the website, and it will kind of direct you on the newsletter. You can go to the Apple Store and grab the app. But what you'll see when you get there is the ability to watch our shows, listen to our shows. You can see the news is being gathered by our news team. And that news actually goes to nearly 50 radio stations, the ones that are part of the SuperTalk Mississippi Media Group, and another 23 or 25 other radio stations on top of that. And so, SuperTalk has enormous muscle in this state, not just to lead conversations, but also on the news side. And, you may be a little frustrated with the news in your local areas where there's just too much news from Indiana, I like to say. We don't want news from Indiana. We want news from Mississippi. And that's what you're going to get when you go to the supertalk.fm page. But one of the stories that was written just in the last few days is a story by Ben Milam, who's a terrific member of that team. He's a multimedia journalist for SuperTalk Mississippi News. The headline says, Coastal Mississippi named one of the best golf destinations in America. And it's USA Today, 10 best, this is editors and readers place Mississippi Gulf Coast on the list of top 10 best golf destinations for 2025. And it's because the region's plethora of golf offerings, the quality of courses, and overall reputation. And if you don't know it, I mean, some of these courses, Grand Bear, Fallen Oaks, the Bridges, designed by people like Jack Nicklaus, Tom Fazio, Arnold Palmer. I had the opportunity, incidentally, to have dinner with Tom Fazio one night at the Beau Rivage with the president of Beau Rivage and Governor Haley Barbour. There were just four of us at dinner. Man, it was a fascinating conversation talking about Tom Fazio's impact really around the world with his golf designs. But we are so lucky to have this distinction. And my daughter and my granddaughter, Riley, and my grandson, Brody, both play golf, and they play competitively. She is, I think, 9 now, and he's 6. And they're out there, they're playing in tournaments every Friday. It's awesome to see them enjoy. But we played out at Grand Bear last Friday, and man, it was magical. That course, I mean, the course is in great shape. The fairways literally look like greens, and the views are amazing. And again, we're so lucky to have it. But just one example of a story that you would see if you go to supertalk.fm. Go to supertalk.fm, sign up for the newsletter, or go download the app. You'll be glad you did. Okay, we got a great show today. I'm going to shift gears now and move over to my friend, Senator Jeremy England, someone I really enjoy spending time with. He'll be with me for the whole show today. Jeremy, how you doing, my friend?
Doing great, Ricky. I appreciate you having me on today.
Yeah, I appreciate you being here. Listen, we always do this. Let's not assume anyone has ever heard you and me talk before. So let's describe specifically the area that you represent as senator here in coastal Mississippi.
Yeah, absolutely. So I represent District 51, which is over here in Jackson County. It is basically the middle part of Jackson County that I represent. So I've got parts of North Ocean Springs, North Goche, all of Moss Point, Van Cleve, over to St. Martin. So I go over from the Alabama line almost all the way to Harrison County. So it's a big district, kind of that I-10 corridor area, full of some of the greatest people in the state.
Well, I know it is. I know it is. And look, you and we've been, believe it or not, it's been 5 years of chatting on this show, you and me, from a wide range of topics. And it is amazing when you think about it. And,
Right.
Some we haven't agreed on necessarily. Many we have. But what I've always admired about you is your willingness to come on and talk to me. And we don't debate. You and I just talk about issues that are important to us. And I would say 90% of the time we're definitely going to agree. But what I've enjoyed about your leadership is that when you decide something needs to happen, you're willing to stand your ground. And I love that about you. And no amount of political pressure or pressure in general is going to shift you after you've done your homework. And you do spend a lot of time doing your homework. Once you decide how you're going to stand on something and you think it's the right thing to do, then you stand there. And I respect that. I wish more legislators would do that. And you're willing to speak out publicly about it. You express yourself on social media, and you really do hard. You do work hard to make your leadership known. I mean, that's pretty accurate, isn't it?
Yeah, and look, Ricky, I really appreciate you saying that. And look, it's hard work, but it's the work that the people deserve. It's an honor to serve, but it is a job, and that job wouldn't be done if I didn't do my homework and if I didn't pay attention to the important issues. And I like to tell people anytime I'm visiting with, whether it be a leadership team like Jackson County leadership comes up every year, or a high school group, I tell them that we have like 4,000 bills in a year, potentially. And every one of those bills is the most important thing in somebody's life. And when you think about it like that, it deserves the attention. It deserves looking into it and doing the homework and doing the research into it. And if it's something I agree with, it deserves me putting my full effort behind it. And I have a lot of folks tell me sometimes, why do you give so much to seemingly some little issues? Well, because they all deserve that. They all deserve our full attention. And one of my good friends over in the house, I won't share his name because I don't know if he'd want me to share this, but I was talking to him about taking on some heavy issues this past session and thanking him for that. And he said, he said, those of us that come up here and do something, sometimes we have a short shelf life in politics, but we're here to do something. And that kind of hit for me, because we can go up here, we can go to Jackson and stay for as long as we want, as long as we don't make waves and just kind of, toe the line and follow the road that we're expected to follow, and don't stick our necks out there. But that's not what we're there for. We're there to make sure we all want Mississippi to be a better place for ourselves, for our families, for basically all of the citizens here. And so that takes work, and it takes putting your neck out there. And I'm proud to do that.
I wish more people would do it. But, at the end of the day, when we have leaders who are willing to kind of push hard, we're going to eventually move the ball forward in Mississippi. And one of the things I like to talk about, Jeremy, you and I may have chatted about this before, but the other thing I like about your approach, that we've seen some who have run for political office who have sought to divide us, to tap into a part of Mississippi that is tries to be very polarizing, or maybe what they're trying to do is project national political polarizing scenarios onto Mississippi. So much so, frankly, that they suggest that when you have a willingness to work across the aisle, that just it doesn't matter the issue, just the willingness to walk across the aisle and visit with and hear the other side and try to gather their support around whatever issue you're working hard on behalf of your constituents, that just the act of doing that, something's wrong with that. I just completely reject that approach to leadership. And thank God through voting, and we won't relive old times here, but the votes of Mississippians have mostly rejected that as well. Thank God. But a lot of work that happens in Mississippi is very bipartisan. We see, again, I've said this before, but I think it's worth kind of focusing on it so people don't forget it. We see the division on these sort of polarizing issues, like maybe the approach we might take to eliminating the state income tax, for example, and there's a number of others that could be polarizing by their very nature, very conservative issues and so on. But we see another host of issues over here where we're agreeing. I mean, I see it on wildlife issues, regularly. I see it on lots of other issues where we work together. I mean, after Hurricane Katrina, I've thought about this many, many times. If we had not decided to work together in those moments, we would not have achieved the recovery that we achieved. It took bipartisan work. It took a governor willing to step across the aisle. It took a speaker who was willing to kind of lay down his sword and be supportive of what we were trying to do. And I'm speaking specifically of Billy McCoy, God bless his soul. But there is a lot of bipartisanship that takes place in the Mississippi legislature, and we often miss that. When we come back on the other side, we're going to pick up right there with Senator Jeremy England. We'll see you right after this. Welcome back to the Ricky Matthews Show from the Citizens Bank Studio. We're visiting with Senator Jeremy England for the whole show today. We're thrilled to have him. When we went to break, we were talking about how, there are these issues that are polarizing in Mississippi, but there are a lot of issues that are very bipartisan in nature. So anyone who suggests working with their counterparts on the other side, being willing to cross the aisle and hear people's perspective and, work to lead together, anyone who suggests that's a bad idea, man, they don't really understand how usually it works in the Mississippi legislature. Talk about that, Jeremy.
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing I know I mentioned something I tell groups when I get a chance to talk with them about bills, but another thing I tell them is what you see in Washington is not what you see in Mississippi. We don't have the partisan, headbutting and throwing grenades at each other and just bickering back and forth. We don't do that. Now, we may disagree, and of course we disagree. We have different principles and different ideologies sometimes. But what I have found when working with Democrats and with Republicans that may not agree with me on everything, we all tend to have the same ultimate goals about something. And if you're strong in your principles and you're strong in your ideologies, you shouldn't avoid talking with somebody that may have a different viewpoint, because if you're strong in it, we'll be strong in it, hear what they've got to say, and maybe change minds, or maybe find a different way to get to the goal, because ultimately it's all about making Mississippi better, being fiscally responsible and doing good things. And you can still talk with other people and do that. I like to tell people that, I might think the best way to get to a point is to take the far right road to get there, and then my colleagues from the Democrat Party may think that far left road is the best way to get there. But there's a bunch of different roads to get to that point, and we're not going to get there if we don't talk and work it out. And look, we do have a supermajority in the Senate and in the House right now, so we could easily ram things through, but that doesn't mean that we always have the best ideas. There might be other ideas that we're sitting on the table just through listening and talking to somebody. And I mean, to think that anybody would want us not to even associate or even fellowship with somebody that maybe doesn't look like us or isn't the same political party with us. To me, that's the most disgusting part of politics. And I'm glad that we don't do that here in Mississippi. I'm glad that I'm able to form relationships with people that I wouldn't be able to meet otherwise. And everybody up there represents their constituency well. They're strong-minded, and they have great ideas. And if we don't talk together and don't, have dinner together, not just occasionally, but frequently sometimes, we're leaving stuff out there and we're not representing the people the best we can if we do that.
So if you go back and look at this legislative session, and we'll get to where we are now, where we're all assuming that soon the governor's going to call a special session, and we'll get up to speed on that and hear it from your perspective. I wrote a column not long ago. Well, it's been it was within a year of when I started doing this show, and the column was essentially that the big three need to get along, and of course at the time we had a different speaker, and we had of course. The current lieutenant governor was in that with his position. The current governor was in this position. someone actually was remembering that column recently and said, you just change the name of the speaker and the situation is still similar. That's
Right.
maybe. I hope that's not true, but it certainly seems like it based on the way we ended the session with not having resolved the budget and we ended on to have worked so hard the whole session. It seemed to end on a weird spot. And then we've got now we've got this special session that has to happen in order to get the budget done. How do you look back on it? Does it frustrate you that leadership doesn't get together more often and doesn't work together, and that the governor doesn't just come over and just walk around and talk to people? And, how do you read that?
Well, first of all, I'll definitely say this was an odd session, especially the way it ended. And it was frustrating. Looking back today to prepare for this interview, at the things that we did and the things that were left on the table because of hurt feelings or because of disagreements on one completely different issue, ended up stopping some other legislation or another piece of policy from going forward. That gets frustrating. But I will say that, look, I have a world of respect for Lieutenant Governor, for Speaker Jason White, and for Governor Tate Reeves. I think they're all where they're supposed to be, and they're all great leaders. But what I think, if we could see some agreement within them and understand that, look, you may have this handful of policy ideas that we want to get through, but you're not going to get all of them, and don't hold other ones hostage until you get them, because that just doesn't help anybody out. It ends up being frustrating to the people of Mississippi. And this is something that my Senate colleagues that we were talking about towards the end of the session, of course, we thought, it was the House's fault that we didn't get a budget done. I'm sure the House thinks that it's the Senate fault. But at the end of the day, the people of Mississippi don't care whose fault it is. They send us up to do a job, and it's our job to break free from those disagreements sometimes and do what's best. And I will say that this special session that we're going to have, leaving without a budget, things really did get pretty deadlocked there. And I heard the governor say, and I think he was correct. He said, sometimes these special sessions are necessary because we have 90 days where we have to get some very important things done. And if we end up kind of in an impasse, it's best to have us go to our corners. And I think the governor said towel off and take a breath and then get back at it a little bit later. And I think that's going to be good for us here. I think we'll be back, maybe middle of May. We'll have to have it done by the end of June. So it's coming up definitely soon, but we'll get there. But to go back and answer your original question, yes, it was very frustrating that we didn't get the job done in the time that we allocated to do it.
I'm in the process, and later I'll give you more about it, but I'm in the process of writing a book. And it's a book. Initially, it was about gathering life lessons from Katrina. The 20th anniversary is coming up. I started writing these lessons after Hurricane Katrina. And as time has gone on, it's evolved into, certainly Katrina's the center of it, but it goes back a little bit further. I had dyslexia as a child, and I struggled with it before, before dyslexia was actually named as a challenge. And I made it through, thank God. But it was a tough road. But I've started to gather those lessons of that part of my life, and then it evolves into Katrina and so on. And the book is tailored after a book. It's a terrific small book, and this is what I want this to be. I want it to be an easy read for most people to be able to get through. I don't want it to be. It's not an autobiography. It's about certain storms in my life, and I'm sharing them and the lessons that I've learned from them about the importance of family and faith and those kinds of things. And also, hope. And the name of the book is Hope's Epidemic. But there's a wonderful book that I keep having in mind as I'm writing this book. It's called How to Be a CEO. It's not just CEO of a corporation. It could be of your life or a nonprofit or whatever. It's a terrific book. One of the lessons in the book is write that important memo and then put it in your top drawer for 2 weeks. Now, I want you to think about that for a minute. I wish that we would all do that, because in this day of busy and moving fast and email and social media, people say and do things really rapidly. And if they had kind of set it aside and came back 2 weeks later and looked at it, they probably would think about it a different way, or maybe they would be a little bit more empathetic about what they're saying and how they're saying it, and more focused on being positive, et cetera. But that, there are a lot of lessons that stick out in that book, but that's one of them. I share that with you. I wanted you to know about my book, but I also wanted you to know this wonderful small book that I'm tailoring it after. That one lesson in there, I never forgot. And there's some truth in that about how the legislative session ended. I think it makes sense to just, let's all take a deep breath, go home, regather our strength, kind of, pray about it, kind of get resituated. Then we'll come back and we'll focus. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And look, what you're talking about with Katrina and with COVID and with your battle with dyslexia and things like that, challenges tend to make people look. You either have to stand up and be great, or you succumb to the challenges. And one thing that we've been able to do in Mississippi, especially on the Gulf Coast with Katrina, with the oil spill, we're resilient here on the coast because we've been through it. Mississippi's been through a lot. The tornadoes we had, the flooding, different issues like that, and certainly the pandemic. There's a reason that hard times make great men, because you have to step up, and women. You have to step up and be able to do things. So that's important. But look where we are now. They say that great times can make weak people. Now, I don't know that that's going to happen, but we're having great times in Mississippi right now. We're in the greatest financial shape that we've ever been in, thanks to the leadership that we have in place now, by the way. But we have economic development happening all over the state. We're able to surpass when we do have tornadoes and different disasters. We have people that are on the ground. They're able to do that. We're talking about cutting taxes. We're doing so many good things right now, and maybe that's making us get a little petty. We're not having those challenges to deal with, and sometimes maybe that's what's causing it. But look, regardless of all that, we're in a great shape right now.
It may. Listen, we'll build off of what you just said, because that's actually an important part of the conversation. When we come back on the other side, we'll continue our conversation with Senator Jeremy England. We'll see you after this. Welcome back to the Ricky Matthews Show from the Citizens Bank studio. We're visiting with Senator Jeremy England. And this is why I enjoy having Jeremy on the phone on the show, because I never know where the conversation is going to go. It's always one that tends to be maybe a little philosophical. I mean, we're at a point where you have to be that. He was making the point when we went to break that Mississippi's doing well financially. And that's true. Weighing that within the context of what I was talking about a few minutes ago, that there are challenges that we face along the way, and sometimes those challenges, as he pointed out, might make us petty, or maybe it brings out some arguments that we probably wouldn't have if we were to have the light of day and a good night's sleep and a little time to think about it. That was the reason I mentioned this, write the memo that's important and then put it in your top drawer for 2 weeks. And then if in 2 weeks you pull it back out, it's still important, then send it. I think in this case, having a little bit of a break gives everybody a chance to kind of think about things and go forward in a way that's important. Here's the other, I want to lay another layer on to you though. So you've got, of course, the speaker, Jason White is working really hard. He understands that education, economic development, these are all extremely important attributes the state needs to continue to focus on. We've had good success in both of those areas, and we got to continue to work on those things. Governor feels the same way. Then if you were to bring Delbert Hosemann, the current lieutenant governor, into the conversation around what I just said, they would all agree on that completely. But then below that, they've got a lot of things on their mind. They're thinking about, what do DOGE efforts do to Mississippi going forward from a financial point of view? How is Medicaid, which is hugely important to medical services across the state of Mississippi, especially given that 51% of Mississippians live in rural areas, and we've had an ongoing challenge about that. We had a big, long conversation about what Mississippi can do to make healthcare stronger in Mississippi last year. We haven't had so much about it, a conversation about it this year. Jason White's worried about that. I'm sure that they all three are thinking about it. So the point I'm making is that beneath the covers of our incremental successes and where we may stand financially, what weighing heavily on all three of them, I'm sure, are a long list of agenda items, objectives that they wish we could get to. And that's frustrating to them, because a state like Mississippi has a lot of challenges. I'll tell you real quick and then, give you a chance to respond. I often quote this guy named Robert J. Danzig. He's the former CEO of the Hearst Corporation. And when I went to the Northwestern Leadership Program up at Northwestern University, he was the commencement speaker for our group. And he said that there's a powerful lubrication to change that comes from pain. That a lot of people, this comes back to our challenges. They move toward change because they're feeling pain, whatever that might be. And his point is that there's always pain there. That individually we should look for it and think about it. Don't wait till you feel substantial pain. Incrementally change yourself based on the pain that you're feeling, and you'll always be improving. Same thing goes for a company. Same thing goes for a state like Mississippi. There's a lot of pain if we open our eyes. Okay, we may be achieving some success for sure, financially and otherwise, but there's always pain to see. And I think in the busyness of a session like we went through just now, there can be just a dust storm that moves us away from recognizing there's still challenges to face. And some people see it, some people don't. But at the end of the day, it can be very frustrating. And you get to the end of the session and the layers of the onion as you pull it back, some of these bills that should have passed that didn't. And it's very complicated at the end of the day, isn't it, Jeremy?
Yes, it is. And a lot of that does get lost in some of the things that we do. And look, my first year was 2020. So right whenever I'm learning how things are going up there and learning what's important, that session, COVID hit. And then that changed everything. We've gone, rocket speed since that point. And it seems we're still going there. Every year we're my understanding from speaking to some of the members that had served longer than me, you would have one big issue each year. Maybe the governor had one issue, the lieutenant governor, the speaker, maybe had their one issue each that they had. Well, now, we're used to going at light speed now. So all of these issues get thrown on us at one time. And so much gets lost in that. And I think that this was one of those sessions where, look, the income tax bill kind of took all the oxygen out of all the rooms. It was the main thing. It was something we were all working on. And look, Senator Josh Harkins, our finance chairman, and Nathan Upchurch, who is Delbert Hoseman's chief of staff, they worked, until midnight or later, most nights until we came up with a plan that we felt worked. And one thing I'll explain too, just because you mentioned incremental change, and I think that's so important. If we're going to make any change, I like incremental change most because it tends to be permanent change, and it tends to be permanent change for the better, and you don't end up in a mess, right? When you see the pendulum go from the far left to the far right or vice versa, those changes aren't ever very permanent. Like we see going on nationally right now. We see executive orders being changed, and then next time somebody gets reelected, those get changed again. We're not making those incremental changes that I think the founding fathers designed our country to make each time. And it gets frustrating. I know some people, especially the House members, get frustrated with the Senate a lot of times because we are more deliberative, and we do tend to take a smaller change and take our time looking at things like that. But when you don't have a crisis like a COVID or like a Katrina, you don't have that sense of urgency in the building for everyone to, hey, we've got to do something right now. We've got to get it done. And that slows things down. And when you slow things down, I think people get frustrated. It's been a big change. We're in 2025 now. 2020 is kind of getting further in the rearview mirror, thankfully. None of us would want to go back and relive that. But we met those challenges. We did some great things in Mississippi. The governor was on the news every day, I think at 2:00, doing a press conference, telling the people what's going on and what we need to do. Those days are behind us now. And I think we all need to maybe, take a breath, focus on what's important, start looking at how we can make incremental changes that will benefit the state in a permanent way. And that's kind of how I try to legislate. And I think maybe that's a message that I wish that maybe the top three leaders could take and work from, instead of having this one big, what we call a big, beautiful bill. We don't need a big, beautiful bill all the time. We maybe just need little small changes that make Mississippi better and make things work better. So I guess that's my theory on how we should legislate.
About that. If I go back to that column that I wrote about the big three need to get together and get along, if I were to apply sort of the basis for that column today, what I would simply say is this. Jason White's going to have issues that are important to him, and Delbert Hoseman's going to have issues that are important to him, and the governor's going to have issues that are important to him. This is the point that you made. What I would do is just add a step in the process. get together, passionately share. Jason should share with the other two why he feels the way he does about why that's an important issue to him. Delbert should do the same thing. The governor can do the same thing. And then maybe what they can decide to do is, instead of disagreeing on one big thing that takes them a whole session to get to some kind of agreement, that they say, look, let's incrementally begin to focus on these things. And let's do all three of our issues. Okay, can we agree? Now, let's take issue number one. Let's agree on maybe the best way to do that. And just add that as a step in the process. Get together for a week or two or for a month if it requires it, but come out of it with a combined thought about what's going to be important for this legislative session. The three of us have worked together, and then they lead together around those issues. And then maybe some of the noise that comes from the disconnect because they have a different approach or maybe different issues won't take the life, suck the air out of the room for a session. I wish they would add that.
Yeah, that's right. And if you come together and you talk about what, there's always going to be those few things that, okay, look, we agree on this, and my idea is, look, we're always going to be back next year. The 2025 session is mostly over. Of course, we have the special session coming up, but 2026 will be here. Build on what we did, and I'll say that HB1, the big income tax bill that we passed this year, it wasn't a 2025 success. It was a 2022 or 2021 through 2025 success. And one reason we got where we were is because the speaker got there. It's HB1, right? It was the first bill they filed, and they started where we left off. We had made progress towards this point, and the Senate had our ideas, and we came forward, and we wanted to look at the numbers that were there, and we gave our input, and we ended up getting there. So it wasn't a 2025 bill. That was a 4-year bill in the making. So even there, you see things that work. That's how the legislature is supposed to work. You just kind of put things together like that. I found it to be very important in my elections committee because there's nothing. I don't think there's any committee in the building that draws ire from both sides like elections does, right? Because it's important to everybody in the buildings. We all got elected, but I have found that if I can take one bill and if I get some agreement on it, move that part of the bill this year. Come back next year to the other parts and see if we can work an agreement out and get something that works for everybody. And if it doesn't, then make sure I've got the votes and pass it if I think it's the right policy. But you can work things incrementally and get them done, and you don't have to have that sense of, hey, it's this year or no year on every bill that comes through that building. And I wish that we could get to that point. That's how I understand it used to be, by the way.
Now, there's a lot to contemplate, and this is all positive. It's about how do we take complexity. The legislature's complex, and as we want to do big stuff, how do we do it in a more efficient manner once the legislative session starts? And I think it could really help if the big three would get together and use their supermajority in a very positive way. Just food for thought. Hey, when we come back on the other side, we'll continue our conversation with Senator Jeremy England. We'll see you after this. Welcome back to the Ricky Matthews Show from the Citizens Bank studio. And we're visiting with Senator Jeremy England, and he never disappoints. We never really know where we're going. We don't have, when Jeremy and I get together, we don't have bullet points. We don't even communicate ahead of time. We just let it go. And we use our knowledge of the current events to guide it, and our observations guide it. So thank you for your willingness to take that approach. Not everyone's willing to take that approach, Jeremy.
No, absolutely. Look, I love our conversations. I think they always end up, like you say, they go, we don't know where they're going to go, but they're conversations, and they're good for the state and good for us all to hear and talk about.
Yeah, there's no doubt. Listen, not to bring up a necessarily sore subject, but your work on trying to create a better voting scenario for Mississippi. So early, a pattern, a possibility around early voting could be part of Mississippi. It got a lot of social media buzz and maybe even some focus from the governor. I don't say maybe. You definitely got focus from the governor. You've been on the show to talk about that, and your view toward it is very adult. I love that. But like most bills, you got it in a good place. And this is something that Mississippi should continue to have conversations about.
That's right. Look, we were so in-person early voting. I know I've talked about it before. And when you hear the phrase early voting, there's still a lot of, you know, some Republicans, one base of Republicans that kind of think, oh, well, that's a Democrat issue. And it's really not. It's a working person issue. It's a convenience issue. And it recognizes the fact that we don't work 9-to-5 jobs and everybody have a nanny at home and be able to do these things. You know, we're busy people. So look, the policy, I think, is a good one. And I think it's something that Mississippi could benefit from. But what we did learn is that what I wanted to pass needed to change, and we adapted that. And at the last day of session, I had a bill that was one step away. All I had to do was table a motion to reconsider, and it would have gone to the governor's desk. It would have given us it still would have been an excuse. You would have had to have an excuse, but you could have voted up to 3 weeks early. And it was a good bill. It's in a good place. But I heard from the Secretary of State. I heard from our clerks. There were just a few things that they still had questions about. And look, it hurt to go up to the well that day and pass that item as opposed to tabling that motion, because I've worked 3 years now on this, or 2 years really hard on this to try to get it done, but it just isn't ready. It wasn't a bill. It wasn't in a spot that I think everybody was comfortable with. So I let it lay, and we'll take it back up next year. But we're in a better spot this year than we were last year. So I look forward to getting on that again.
Doesn't it amaze you watching the national scene that some would be okay with illegal immigrants voting, and that some fight voter ID? When you think about Mississippi, they said you'd never get voter ID in Mississippi. But not only did we get it, but it's working pretty darn smoothly, isn't it?
It is. And look, and I'll say right now that without Lieutenant Governor Delbert Hosemann when he was Secretary of State, and without the people speaking up and filing petitions and wanting that in the Constitution, we might not have that in Mississippi. And there was a lot of work that went behind that. But that's so important. You only want citizens to vote. And we hear from people, they say, oh, well, it doesn't happen very often, or it's such a small problem. And let me tell you what I've learned about elections, Ricky. If you have one issue arise, the integrity of that entire election comes into question. And you just can't have that with something that important, electing our officials. So every little issue is a big issue when it comes to elections. And certainly we only want citizens voting. We only want people who are registered voting. We only want you voting once, and we want your vote counting. We want the people to know that their vote counts. So that's all very, very important, and things that I take very seriously when I weigh each and every elections bill that comes through my committee.
Amazing. Hey, tourism, one of the big changes is tourism. Visit Mississippi used to be underneath the Mississippi Development Authority. Now there's legislation that has taken it out. That's probably a good move, isn't it?
Look, I agree with the move. And look, I think there's some departments and agencies we could probably, phase down and get rid of. But this was certainly one we needed, and not just because it's so big. The return on investment in tourism dollars is always the most impressive thing to me, especially in Mississippi. And we get people here and they stay here and they spend their money here. A lot of times they'll retire here, they'll move here. It's such an important thing. But MDA is doing so many other things. You've got the governor's office. He's got a great team there with Bill Cork and a few others that are doing a great job in bringing new businesses to all over the state of Mississippi. And now they can focus on that. And they can let the Department of Tourism focus on things like getting people here and figuring out what we offer as a state, and then turning those dollars into more of that, because we want to stop brain drain, but we also want to kind of reverse that and get people coming to our state, and having a Department of Tourism to show off what we all know to be, one of the greatest places to live. I think you say live, work, and play. Having a department that's focused on that is going to do great. And I think it's also going to benefit MDA to not have to have that burden or that issue anymore. And they can go out and focus more on workforce development and getting people here to the state of Mississippi. So I'm really excited about that.
Well, you're right about Bill Cork and his team. I'm just so impressed. That's such an important work. That's such important work that they do, working with the governor to work with regions of the state. The work they've done in Madison, the work that they've done up in the Golden Triangle. We could just take every area that, up in the DeSoto County area, even the Mississippi Gulf Coast is really important. And one of the things I've been writing a lot more about lately is that we need to keep our 3 economic development organizations on the coast, but have a new organization that represents maybe the 6 coast counties focused on the big stuff so that we can have a single point of contact for big stuff, maybe mega site development and such as that. So we'll talk more about that next time. Yeah. Military. Oh, for sure. Military. Yeah. Unbelievable. Okay. This has been Jeremy England, Senator from Coastal Mississippi. It's been a pleasure, my friend.
Thank you so much, Ricky. I enjoyed it.
Yeah. Have a great day, and we'll see you tomorrow.